Back live with you tonight, and thanks for staying on. The Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services has launched an investigation into the conduct of the private security company G4S. The giant security firm is a private partner at the Mangaung Correctional Center in the Free State. Now, this probe follows allegations of torture, corruption, and the violation of human rights at the facility, and multiple concerns from investigative journalists, former inmates, as well as professionals. Now, there are also some serious claims by friends of inmate Sujan Miah, who is serving a life sentence, that he had been discriminated against and victimized by G4S officials. For more on this conversation, we're joined now by Bhudu, the leader of the South African Prisons Organization for Human Rights, as well as Ipusa's Mpho Kwinika. Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you very much for your time and coming on tonight here on In Focus. Miles, let me begin with you right here in the studio. I don't know, and I've been looking, but maybe you would know, what are the historical factors that have led to South Africa saying we would like to get private players coming into the correctional space?
Thank you very much for having me tonight, and that is where the looting and the plundering spree began.
Right.
All in the name of BEE, and it was later tripled to triple BEE. You know, we as an organization, since time immemorial, we were totally against the privatization of prisons, because when we went through the list, we found out it was the usual suspects who were politically connected and had absolutely no interest in correctional matters, but it was for them to be positioned so that they can eat. And they have been eating for the past 20 years.
Yeah. How big is the pie? How big is the pie? How much of a share do they have in this pie?
Look, these two prisons, one is in Kutamasentimula. It's not as if nothing is not happening there. That prison is run along the lines of tribalism. Everything is thrown under the veil of secrecy. The taxpayer pays 1 billion rands a year renting those two facilities. Wow. And this money goes to the United States, because that prison is run along the lines of the United States penal system. The one in Mangaung is run along the line of the United Kingdom penal system. And we are told that at Mangaung per prisoner, it's 435 rands a day. And we are talking about head counts, warm bodies, and human factors. Those prisons, those two prisons, are never overcrowded or undercrowded, because if there's one prisoner missing or less, they get 435 rand less. Kutamasentumulo, we are told it's 415 rands per inmate. And I'm telling you, these clever fat cat BEE blacks are having a nice time, and I don't know.
So these facilities are charging its per inmate charge that we are talking about. So their motivation is the contract should be based on per client that is charged.
Of course, that's why you will never find overcrowding there. And these are the two prisons that you won't even find anywhere on the SADC, on the region, and in the African continent. It is the only two prisons in the entire region. And these prisons, you know, as an organization that has been fighting since my release from prison in 1991, we were never given access to go there all by ourselves to go and see what's happening.
I want to talk about that. We'll talk more about that ability to monitor these facilities. But Mpho, let me bring you in here. I mean, should we assume that the reason why we've got these facilities is because the management of the correctional space has been such a problem for the government that they've decided, look, we need to bring in a private player here? I tell you, I've had a look at, not particularly in South Africa, I don't know what the reasons were, but for example, elsewhere in the country, there are largely two reasons that I drive. One is the cost factor, that it's cheaper for the private sector to be able to build these facilities and run them, and the government does not have to take up a loan or whatever, get money to build this facility. They just only contract out the portion that they require, which is the correctional aspect of it. But two, is that there's efficiency that is brought on because these facilities, they bring, of course, the latest tactics and technologies. What's your thinking?
Look, I think the reason given to public about venturing into these two institutions It is because our South African prisons are full to the brim, and then government is chasing, to find spaces where they can house. Most of these people that are gone bad are these young kids, poor people who cannot even afford bail. I think South Africans are aware of the decisions that are taken by the corrections and the Department of Justice to even reduce, some money for these people to be able to pay so that they are out of that space. However, government also ventured into this to say, let us have a private partnership program where they will design, they will build or construct and even manage facilities. Putamas in Chumure and this Mangaung Prison came as a result of these two. So the government does not, they still carry the risk of running a prison. Now, all the risk that goes along with other public institutions, these two private institutions have signed a contract with government to ensure that those facilities run smoothly. Yes, they are built because of the tax. If you look at Putamas and Tumuri, it's an automated kind of facility. The one in Mangaung is still done, operated manually. Yeah. But if you look at the way people are managing it seems to be far much better than the public institution.
But it seems, Mpho, as soon as management issues arise, they are blamed on the poor contracts that government has with these facilities. For example, we were speaking to one member of the Portfolio Committee on Corrections earlier this week saying, for example, as the Portfolio Committee, and Miles has just said now, even as the Portfolio Committee, they cannot have access to that particular facility, for example, to exercise oversight, to police even the contract, to see if what is in the contract is actually what they are getting as far as the facility is concerned. Access to it is a big challenge.
Every year we are made to believe that there is a supervisory committee that do the assessment in these two institutions. These supervisory committees report to the director, who then report to the Commissioner of Correctional Services. If this is not happening, then it is a breach of contract. But it is in a contract that the government must always have a risk assessment program in place to ensure that the facilities remain under the control of government.
Yeah. Why were you denied, Miles? Why were you denied access to monitor this space?
I mean, for years, I was released in 1991 on the 17th of August. And when I was in prison, we started the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights. And we lived far ahead of our times because we never knew that someday we will come here and talk about the rights of... We knew, I beg your pardon, we knew that someday there would be a chapter, a section, a subsection, a paragraph that will protect the rights of those who are detained. So we started drafting a recognition and a procedural agreement document whilst I was in prison. So I came out in 1991 and we started talking and negotiating with the apartheid regime at its last kicking moments. And when the new government came in, we thought that they were going to let us go into a recognition and a procedural agreement where we as an organization work with the Department of Correctional Services in order to repair the damage that was done by an apartheid Department of Prisons. But it was never to be. Yeah. And the document is a revolving document. It is a recycled document. We are still sitting on this document to get access. They don't want us to come in.
Is it recognized by the Judicial Inspectorate?
Well, the Judicial Inspectorate needs to be dismantled because the Judicial Inspectorate has been used as a front to take and absorb the shock that comes from community-based organizations. And this is a Stalin sort of an approach. Yeah. You know, it's all like this, you call it parastatals.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to talk to the Department of Correctional Services, you must go via the Judicial Inspectorate and Correctional Services.
Yeah.
They are paid by taxpayers' monies to keep on discrediting organizations like us. And they should have knew right from the beginning that what we're talking about is something that happened almost 2 years ago, because they also sent their so-called independent correctional services visitors to make sure that these calamities are reported long before it blows.
So what do you say then to that issue that's being raised? One is to say, we hear what your concern is, but your concern, one, is covered by the contract. The contract itself and the performance requirements of that contract covers you as far as the human rights issue is concerned. But two, you've got the Judicial Inspectorate that is handling the judicial oversight. So the human rights aspect is covered.
No. The Judicial Inspectorate, as I said, was established like Santaco, you know, so the government don't directly deal with the taxi industry. They've got a sort of a puppet to absorb all the shock, you know, and it comes at the huge taxpayers' money to let this Judicial Inspectorate keep on being doorkeepers. You know, they need to dismantle this thing and maybe come back and let people like us and others who are from prison and know exactly what is happening there become involved, so that the public must know that their monies are worth investing in the Department of Correctional Services.
Yeah. There are two issues here for us that have now come up, particularly with the Thabo Bester escape, but also there have been other instances now of complaints, particularly against the G4S facility in Mangaung. One is the propriety of the private sector taking over a state function, whether or not we should be in a situation where government or the state is wholly handing over a responsibility to a private sector. But two, what happens as far as liability and accountability in instances like this, where it could be negligence, it could be corruption, it could be whatever, but a prisoner has escaped?
You know, like I said, the government has not abdicated its responsibility to look after those two prisons. I'm referring you back to the contract that they have between the private partnership program, what you call it, the concession contract. In this contract, they even went to an extent of saying, for performance purposes, if the prison becomes poorer and then there are escapes and all those things, one of the penalties there in that clause is that they may be penalized for millions. And again, let me go back to this issue of saying, we were made to believe that the government is saying to private businesses, go and build an infrastructure, design it, and manage it. What I am going to do as government, I'm going to make sure that I fill those prisons, facilities with prisoners. And I'm sorry to use this word. There's a better word for it. So government is maintaining this risk by ensuring that those facilities are forever full. And I had Comrade Bhudu say they are sometimes not full to the capacity. But that contract says if they are not utilized fully, there are penalties as well. So I don't know who's going to be penalized when government is not bringing in enough, people to fill up those facilities. But building those infrastructure and allowing private people to deal with this issue in partnership with communities as well, because private and businesses must allow and assume people from those environments where these institutions are being built. Yeah. We felt that this is the best, is a good plan to alleviate problems of overcrowding in our prison.
Yeah. Brother, I mean, how do you feel about this idea of propriety, right? Where, for example, if an offender or an inmate breaks the institutional rules, somebody who is not a member of state actually takes the responsibility of disciplining them.
Well, it is a fallacy that is making the Department of Correctional Services nothing else but a laughing stock. You must also be reminded that the minister had said absolutely nothing since this whole bourba started. And I can tell you within 2 weeks, everything is going to die down if the media is not keeping their knee on the neck of this department. In fact, the Judicial Inspectorate, there was a time where they were an independent Judicial Inspectorate. They got up one morning, they were no more independent. They were just Judicial Inspectorate and Correctional Services. But when they sent their visitors in these prisons, these visitors were called the Independent Prison Visitors. And then they changed it to the Independent Correctional Center Visitors. How possible is that? The mother body is not independent, but those who are sent in to go and inspect, go and make sure that prisoners' rights are not violated, are independent. So it has been a joke. We have been fighting. Sonke Justice Gender went to the Constitutional Court to try and unshackle the Judicial Inspectorate from the Department of Correctional Services. Yeah. They won that case. Legislation were amended, but still the Judicial Inspectorate is under shackles within the Department of Correctional Services because it's about money, and it is a lot of money. Why don't you think? Why do you think that people like us, who has been long in this field, are not invited to come and say, Miles, look, you don't have to work for the Judicial Inspectorate on Correctional Services, but we want to use the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights to play a watchdog role over us, so you watchdog the other watchdog. They would never do that because this is money. This is for people to get rich quick and live the lavish life.
Back live with you tonight, Joan in Focus, and thanks for staying on. Leader of the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights, as well as the General Secretary for the Independent Policing Union of South Africa, Mpho Kwinika, are still my guests tonight. So during the break, as you were mentioning that, I mean, the proponents of the privatization of prisons are saying that having private sector players coming in and owning these facilities for 25 years could possibly be a good thing, because then the public sector are going to adopt better operational and administration processes, learning from these private sector players. Is that a contested view? Is that true? Have we seen improvement in how public sector facilities are managed?
That is what they made us to believe. But it was all not even a lie. It was a fallacy and a fracas. And that was to, I mean, it's sad, not out of our own making. We are not intelligent people, and it didn't come out of our own making. So one clever 2-3 white black guys will come here with a story, and we must believe it because we have dropped our guts. We were told, and Pop Crow then were viciously against this whole model. But now seemingly they have been absorbed and they have been swallowed, because it's monies that we're talking about, a lot of monies. You have some of their members who have been brutalized by the system. You have their members running to other organizations and even talking to us, and then we say, please, our mandate is to deal with the rights of sentenced and unsentenced prisoners. You know most where to go. And then they tell us they've been sold out. And I hope you have read a book written by Ruth Hopkins about how some of them are complaining of being overworked, underpay, overtaxed, and soon they will be over the hill.
Hopkins was on the channel just yesterday.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a sad thing, and activism has died down. And I try to understand why the majority of the people of this country has left this department in the hands of nobody, in no man's land. Because very seldom do we talk about the rights of victims of crime and violence. And it is a tragedy because the Victims' Rights Charter was finalized some years ago. We should have by now, when you consult with the Constitution, get a chapter, a section, a subsection, a paragraph that in fact defend the rights of victims of crime and criminals. And that is why whoever is in a strategic position in this jurisdiction do as they are pleased, they get away with it, because who really cares when somebody ends up in prison?
So are you saying that the fact that inmates are taken, offenders are taken to these private facilities, in your view, they are actually violating the rights of these prisons?
Well, because these prisons are private, these people do as they are pleased there. And the security is so tight. It's very seldom that you can get a contraband cell phone. That is what they call it. We call it a gadget. And we have been, for more than 15 years, started nagging and pleading with the department to start a research how these gadgets could be legalized in prison, so that you don't hear from us as an organization, you hear it from the horse's mouth. But then we are told it's for security reasons that these gadgets cannot be legalized. And then they talk about these people will proceed, keep on going on, continuing with their criminal activities. Okay, whereas the system itself is a criminal empire, and we are saying these gadgets could be used to inform not only us but inform the taxpayers of how brutal this institutions are.
Well, I mean, a typical example now is this Double Bester fellow who continued his criminal activity in prison, where he was holding apparently video conferences and swindling money of people who were unsuspecting inside a hall somewhere.
Have they listened to us 5 years ago, 10 years ago? That was not going to happen, because these gadgets were going to be recorded, were going to be monitored, and these gadgets were going to know exactly who is doing what behind bars, which is illegal. You understand? But we've asked 15 years ago. It's not as if it doesn't happen in developed and civilized, matured democracies around the world.
Robert, could it be that we are in this situation because of what Amaz is saying here, that the staff at these institutions are overworked, they're underpaid, and by and large they find themselves in a situation where they could easily be, I suppose, bought with money? Because if you look at how this whole entire escape could have happened, I'm sure money played a big role here.
Yeah. Look, the issue of Bester should not be generalized into the wild corruption that is taking place in any prison, including the very sensitive where he escaped from. Our members are going through hell because of the issue of Bester. And we are trying very hard to stay next to them, encourage them to continue to do the good work. And we want the authorities and the rest of South Africans to give the authorities and the space to deal with the issue of Bester. Because it cannot be that the matter of Bester be attributed to corruption and all these things committed by our members in that facility. I think that is not right. Yes, our members are working under very severe conditions. Comrade Miles has said it all. You know, the prisons, there are certain facilities or sectors which unions, regardless of their inefficiency and ineptness, they still continue and want to preserve that space for themselves. And organizations that are growing, such as ours, are prevented from entering into this space. We are there now, and we want to make sure that we bring the deal. We are not only in corrections, we are in the policy environment and the other metro police and traffic department environment, because precisely of what Comrade Miles has been saying now. Now, we want to ensure that the issue of Mangaung is dealt with professionally, and we are glad to see that Judge Cameron is there. All other stakeholders have been brought in there to make sure that those that are responsible for that incident are brought to book.
So, let me understand you clearly. You're saying we shouldn't say corruption played a role here? Why would a tight facility, high security infrastructure like this be penetrated in such a way if there is not some kind of corruption that is at play here?
I'm saying we should not generalize. I want us to drill deep into what has really transpired. And those institutions have got facilities where you are able to check down as to who opened here, when did it happen, why, and all that. And I'm glad that the preliminary reports indicate or point to certain individuals that are involved in it. But that institution still has got the best guards that are there, best workers, people who have dedicated to wake up every day in the morning saying we are going to serve South Africa better. And those people will need to encourage them to do good. But those that are involved in incidents such as this, yes, the law must take its course. But we should not break the spirit and morale of those who wake up every day in the morning.
So interesting that you raised that. One of the issues that is being raised by those who are criticizing these private facilities is that they of course cut costs as far as staff is concerned, so they would reduce the number of staff complement in order to maximize profits. But two, they are hiring people who are not trained at levels that they should be at, so that they pay them less. So professionalism and commitment is not a priority to staff who are in these private facilities as compared to public sector prisons, where, of course, they are unionized and it would be a little bit more difficult to exploit them.
No, Thabo, you see, that is why I said what we were made to believe in that contract is that the government has not abdicated its responsibility to take her full responsibility of that issue. The issue of training, there is a training committee that is looking at it. Before they certify that these guys are qualified to go in and do their work in that facilities, the prison authorities, I'm talking corrections, they have got people who have to certify, they have to do that job. So I think the standard that is set there, it cannot be less than the standard the government has set for other public institutions.
And how has this assisted in the reforms that are required in the public sector? I put that question that I put to Miles earlier on to say the proponents of privatization of the corrections space have said the public sector will learn some lessons here and improve how they are administrating their particular processes. Is there evidence out there that the public sector is also improving based on what the practices they are seeing in the private sector?
I don't know how can we compare, the public, facilities with this kind of a project, because you can hear that these are limited numbers that are in there, whereas the public institutions, the public facilities are overwhelmingly, full to the brim, trying to accommodate each and every person that is there. They were brought in here, and I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that Comrade Miles is not being put into this environment of assessing, the viability of these facilities, because Bloemfontein, it was started, the first prisoner went in there in June 2000. And Kutamas in Tumule, the first prison went in there in 2002. Now, we are now approaching the end of this project. And if this project was to come to an end with the tone that I'm hearing from this debate today, yes, then the government have lost in this project. Because this is the project that needs to be now spread out throughout the country. You know the issues of our people in prison. The human rights are not with you. The human rights are not in prison. Human rights are not at home. Human rights are with humans. Wherever they go, human rights must be with them. So those people who are in prison today, under those squalid conditions, and in the public environment, they need to experience the life of those people that are in these two institutions. And government must be able to implement these things after the expiry of this project. But with what we are hearing now, it is clear that government hasn't done enough.
So, Miles, we hear that 3 officials at this G4S security company in that facility in particular have been suspended. Do you think that's all we're going to hear about this matter? Is there any other party that's going to take responsibility?
Those are small fries. We've got persons of interest here, but our sources don't give full names and surnames for security reasons. There's a Snowy correctional officer who is well known there, a Masondo Masuku, and a Chipsy. I don't know what their real names are. Maybe they are part of the persons of interest that has been suspended. But if they want to come out lightly from this whole saga and they know something, then they must tell the truth as it is. And that might count in one day when justice is about to be done into mitigating circumstances that they assisted the investigating officers to get to the matter, because there were both sentence and correctional officers on the premises when all of this happened. Even the guy that managed the main gate needs to tell us what he or she knows. I mean, there are CCTV cameras all over the place. There is no way that whatever you do there will never be picked up unless, as we were told, that some of these correctional officers, which I mention now, managed the CCTV cameras. Some of them will switch off deliberately so that the project could proceed. But we want to make a clear call to the fugitive, Thabo Bester and his lover, Ubani Ulo Nandipha, Makutumana.
Yeah.
That they are fugitives of the law. What they must also do, they must hand themselves over at the nearest police office, police station, or law enforcement offices, because, you know, what is happening here reminds me of a title track of Bhudu, which was entitled Wemzala Sugumushage.
Let's leave it there. Out of time. Much appreciated. Golden Miles Bhudu, the leader of the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights.